Welcome to today's episode of Door Church Connect, where we have been talking about dealing with topics and things that require you and I learning how to think and how to live biblically that ends up with our lives and the lives of those around us being blessed. And we're very glad to pick up today our conversation that started last week with Pastor Joe Campbell and the subject of emotional health and how that is such a large part and sometimes an ignored part, an overlooked part of achieving spiritual maturity and the dominion that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So we want to welcome and thank all of you for taking the time to join in with us today.
Yeah, we're going to be kind of shedding some light on the narrative that you cannot control your feelings. As if, the typical preteen girl, whether you identify as one or not, but the preteen girl with the tantrum shouting, "You can't tell me how I need to feel or how to feel." I mean, that may be true. I mean, you can't tell someone how to feel literally, but in our text, we're talking about how to behave and how you control the way you feel. Growing up, Nike destroyed the world with their slogan, "Just do it." But, I mean, that's not true emotional health. That's not emotional maturity. And we're going to be getting into the idea of not only taking dominion over the way you feel, but channeling that correctly and doing things correctly, even when your emotions are betraying you.
Yeah, that's why the Bible's emphasis isn't how are you feeling? It's on our behavior. And Pastor Campbell last week had some amazing things to say, some very heart-revealing things as well. But today we want to talk specifically about the book that he wrote, Deliverance to Dominion, because it really does deal with the subject of wellness, especially when you read the subtitle, which is How to Gain Control of Your Life. So, Joe, thank you again for being with us today. And I thought a good place to begin is just by telling us about the inspiration and the evolution of what eventually resulted in your book, Deliverance to Dominion.
A number of issues, but one of the major issues was seeing people, counseling people, pastoring people, trying to work with people that had a powerful deliverance, maybe 10, 20 years of drug addiction, maybe even pornography. The list goes on. And they would be powerfully delivered, but when it came to serving God with victory, when it came to experiencing the life that Christ promised us, they lacked. And I began to see what it was it's possible to be delivered and yet not have dominion. And as I saw that, of course, the scripture we've been talking about in Romans, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, arguments, high things that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. Then here's the key to dominion. Yes. Bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Jesus Christ, being ready to punish all disobedience when our obedience is fulfilled. So deliverance is what God does. The children of Israel, God delivered them from bondage and slavery. He did this by the power of his hand. Moses' rod. He did it with plagues. He did it with the blood over the doorpost, a picture of salvation. He parted the Red Sea. All of that's deliverance.
Yes.
That's what God does. But these same people, after experience on all of that, never reached their inheritance. They died in the wilderness because they didn't have dominion. Dominion was how you process life. It's how you think. In other words, they were delivered by the hand of God, but when it came to crisis, when it came to they're tired of manna, when it came to conflict, they did not know mentally how to work through the different issues of life, and consequently, they never reached their potential, their inheritance. And I see that constantly in people.
Well, that was something that challenged me, and that is, God, I don't want to experience and know the grace and the power of your deliverance, but then end up not walking that out, not living that out, and then failing to reach the destiny that you have for my life. And so that thought in and of itself, to me personally, has been very, very challenging. And so we wanted to just take some time to go through some aspects that inspired you, that you wrote about, and let you just expound on them. And that way, people that are watching or listening, you can go out and you can purchase or download a copy of it for yourself, because like a lot of sermons, my conviction is you need to hear it more than once. It's actually, some sermons are better like leftovers the second or third time around.
Red chili enchiladas, yes. Yes. Hey, so number one, you talk about in your book, you talk about Leviathan and how that relates to cultural traps. Leviathan's mentioned like 6 times in the Bible. Some commentators think it's a crocodile. Some say it's something a lot cooler than that. But could you tell us how the spirit of Leviathan impacts our lives today?
It's the twisting serpent. The crocodile destroys by twisting. It grabs its prey and begins to rotate and twist. And that's what the spirit of Leviathan. It twists your experience. It twists back to the emotions. It twists truth to where it's no longer truth. The other thing with Leviathan, it's hard to catch. It's slippery. I mean, it's very difficult many times to put a label or mentally or spiritually to capture these things that hinder our dominion. In other words, when you're growing up, you're talking about culture, your family has a culture.
Right.
It has a language, and I'm not speaking English or Spanish, but your family has a cultural language. It could be kindness, it could be anger, it could be multiple. It has a culture that extended family. The playground has a language, school has a language, today social media. And so all of this created how you process life. You either react with anger, you don't respect me. By your culture, your mind was shaped.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. It's become you. It's become normal. This is how I got some families powerfully delivered from drugs, but when it comes to marriage, it's Jerry. I mean, to them, that's normal. So even though they're a Christian, they want to refashion their marriage after that because to them, that's home. But the problem is it's not biblical. And the problem is somewhere it begins to break down. And so Leviathan was a picture many times, in my mind, of the culture that we were raised in. The meanings, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. How you reacted to neighbors, how you responded, your child is failing in class. We have a whole culture today that it caters to the emotion and it opposes biblical truth. And so that is going to be the challenge with dominion. Here is the children of Israel. They're delivered, but hundreds of years of slavery has shaped their mentality on how they view authority, how they view problems, how they view struggle, life. So in the wilderness, their answer to every problem was to murmur and complain and kill Moses.
Well, I'm thinking about this because the goal of establishing dominion, you've made the distinction, and you can perhaps elaborate on it if you want even more, between I can experience deliverance, but not walk in the dominion that is intended to bring. And I thought about the scripture because we have talked about emotional health. A man without self-control is like a city broken down and left without walls. So without dominion, what you're talking about, there's going to be a greater measure of vulnerability in people's lives to things that can trip them up and cause them to lose out on fullness or the abundant life that Jesus has for us.
Yeah, my experience is somewhere hell will form a weapon around the arena of your life where you have not established dominion. And we all have it. Everyone here has assets and deficits. The tendency is to run on your talent or your asset and ignore the deficit. This is true in sports. A lot of these great college athletes, NBA, they get to the NBA, but they were like one or two dimensional. They had great athleticism, they had skill, but they didn't develop. The thing that made Michael Jordan so great is he developed defense and a jump shot.
Right.
But so many people, that's true in life, they don't do that. And because they're accomplishing, that you can even be pastoring and you're successful because your talents, but then down the road at a critical time, say Moses. Think about Moses, this incredible man of God. I mean, this burning bush, these conversations with God on the mountain, and yet anger. Remember, he killed the Egyptian.
Right.
Later in life, he's been delivered with the people of God, and yet later in life, he's frustrated, he's upset. No doubt he's tired of carrying the weight. You're talking about pastors. He's tired of all the complaining, and God says, speak to the rock. And what does he do? He smites the rock. He's evident, this anger, it's not a person now, but still, God says, because you did that, you're going to see it, but you're not going to partake of it. That's an apt picture of where lack of dominion in one area and hell orchestrated and no doubt was involved to cause and exploit that.
Yeah, that's powerful.
We live in a society now where just going off and saying what you mean, whether it's on Twitter or Thanksgiving or wherever it is, where that's venerated now, where people can just say whatever, and you're being your true, authentic self. But the Bible doesn't teach that at all. Like you just said, can you speak to fathers raising sons? This is something my old man would teach me all the time. I didn't get it. Now I have 2 boys. And how do you teach that? How do you show them that?
Yeah, you have first exposure to your children. That's number one. You have them before anyone else has them. And my father was unsaved. He came through World War II. He had some of his own issues. He was a periodic alcoholic. But I can remember, because what we're talking about is discipline, which is the opposite of what you're saying. We're talking about, you don't just say everything that comes to your mind. I can remember him saying, son, be quiet. I can be at the table and I'm fidgeting. Son, be still. Son, Campbells don't do that. And in those days, as much as this has changed today, but I had exposure with my father and my dad. I worked with him. We grew up on a farm. I could see him. He was there. It's kind of like discipleship. Discipleship, the most effective is in the moment. It's in the relationship of the moment, not so much always from the pulpit. My dad never had a class. He never lectured me, but he taught me, son, you don't reach at the table. Someone will pass. And all of these, I would come home and maybe I'm upset. I was playing basketball, different things. And he taught me at an early age by example and by his words, and if needed, by pain, that you didn't just go off at the mouth, as you're talking about, or you didn't allow your emotions to just run everywhere. That was unacceptable.
One of the things that jumped out at me is you're talking about dominion and its effect on the decision-making process in life. And life, unfortunately, folks, is about making decisions.
Preach.
And but you really homed in on, and I heard you mention earlier about the culture of victimhood. And I think that, in my opinion, you can correct me or add to that, but the culture of victimhood is in ascendancy. It is really taking control in our society at almost every level. And so you've got to know then that someone who comes along with a message about taking responsibility for their actions or for their behavior is going to sound a bit foreign today.
That's true. But somewhere, no matter what nation you live in, what culture, somewhere the Bible has to be the ruling element of truth for your life. Think about victims. Victims never have the victory.
Yeah, no, they don't.
There's no faith in being a victim. And without faith, you'll never please God. And so if I'm a victim, what I'm really saying is you're responsible for me. You're responsible for my condition, my place in life, wherever I'm at. But that is not an answer. That is a dead-end street. You'll never, how can you be successful if it's always someone else's fault or always someone else to blame? It's my parents, it's God, it's my past, it's this person or that person. But that is a horrible, horrible bondage of life. There's no vision in it. there's no future.
No future, yeah, no future. And it's like there are some that have bought into this, where the more examples of, hey, I'm a victim, I'm a card-carrying lifetime member of the victim group, the better off you are. And yet that is a complete lie, and it's completely contrary to the things you're saying: having victory, having joy, knowing what it is to be an overcomer.
Yeah, it's a curse.
Yeah.
In my mind, it is a curse. It's a cultural curse.
Right. And I think, you're talking about the children of Israel right at the cusp of the promised land. And they chose, you can be a victor, go fight for it. Or you can be a victim and stand right here. And they chose, well, let's just stay victims and walk around in a circle for about 40 years and see what happens. So it was a choice that we all have to make. You also talk about in your book, you talk about two specific areas, words and money and the relationship to dominion. And I think both of those are both currency. Words and money are both currency. They're both social contracts. They're ideas that we agree to as a society. But biblically, both of these areas are influential and directional. And when talking about money, Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's directional. David said, set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth. Keep the door of my lips. Incline not my heart to any evil thing or wicked works. He understood the power of words to affect our hearts and our lives. And then James the Just, probably the premier passage on the power of the tongues, liken the tongue to a bit in a horse's mouth or a rudder on a ship. And both of these have directional implications that involve dominion. So can you talk about the place of money and words and the steps people can take towards establishing dominion in their lives in those two areas?
Yeah, probably this generation is known as the credit card generation, and even now electronic money.
Right.
And it's almost become unreal.
Yeah.
And so it's like we have no concept of debt and interest. Interest is staggering. And so there's three things about money. As you said, where your treasure is, there's your heart also. And so all I have to do to measure your priorities is see where you spend your money. And the Bible teaches about tithing. Tithing cuts covenant with God, which is powerful. Giving is the seed of return. Give, and it shall be given back to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. I'll cause men to give back to you. Same measure you give, it'll be returned. Every farmer knows that. But the other one that's missing many times is savings gives you dominion over a consumer spirit. I learned this in the late 80s. The Chinese are masters with money. And from the time their child is born, they begin to save for that child. There's something about America, they call it a consumer society. We're consumer people. People go shopping like relaxation.
Yeah.
It's like an entertainment. But you see, savings gives you dominion over that spirit where you buy things, one, you don't need, and two, you can't afford. And so I wonder how many people, they say one of the most common causes of divorce is finances.
Yeah.
I wonder how many people have missed God, either disqualify themselves from ministry, or how many people they're tormented in their mind, they can't sleep, they have all kinds of anxiety simply because they haven't learned to live in a budget. They haven't learned to have dominion when it comes to their finances and their economics. And you read about, Alvin Iverson, great sports players, made millions of dollars, and today they're broke.
Wow.
And so money is the currency of life, of course. It's currency, as you said. And so if you're going to function in the currency of life, somewhere you have to get control of your economics. And that's dominion. That's a critical aspect of dominion.
Yeah, most people, I would say, are not ever taught this growing up. Schools definitely don't talk about it. I don't know how many families do that. Dominion is directly related to issues regarding money. And you mentioned the Chinese. These are people groups that actually have established dominion in countries when it comes to money. And so if that's true with large people groups, how much more individuals?
Yeah, they have the term of the Chinese, that family has old money. And what it means is generational.
Yeah.
You know, the bumper stickers, I'm spending my kids' inheritance. Well, to me, that's insanity.
Right.
That's very selfish. Why would you do that? And you hear sometimes some of these people who are very wealthy, they force their children to work because that gives them an appreciation of money and the value of money. When I was a kid, I worked. I worked for money. I remember I picked strawberries 6 cents a quart. I took up hay 50 cents an hour. I'm telling you how old I am.
Yeah.
I can remember I had a little wagon. I'm just a kid. I've got 3 watermelons in my wagon going door to door selling them. Sweet corn, different vegetables. I would have my wagon and I would walk around town. I can remember cutting lawns with a reap hook. Most people don't even know what that is. I had no lawnmower. But I learned the value of money by laboring for it. If it's just handed to you, then you have a tendency it's not real. It's like fictitious. It's like a fantasy. It's like, Mom, use your credit card, you know. And so somewhere, though, as a Christian, as a human being, if you're going to have peace, if you're going to have, and that's part of dominion.
Yeah.
Dominion brings peace. It brings stability. You're not jerked all over planet Earth. It's true emotionally. It's true financially. You're going to have to somewhere establish a plan for your resources, your finances, your income. Doesn't matter if you start out minimum wage.
Yeah. So in your church, in your ministry, then this idea of deliverance not automatically leading to dominion is that you've obviously then seen people powerfully delivered but derailed, or at least struggle because they don't deal with the financial aspect of their life.
Absolutely. One couple comes to mind. I was going to launch them. I mean, great couple. I just mentioned about their finances. I understand you may have a car payment or something, but they had like thousands of dollars of credit card debt. And what upset me, they had just taken this elaborate vacation, $4,000 or $5,000 vacation, and added to their credit card debt. And I said, I can't launch you now. You got to take care of this.
Now that everybody's been thrust onto YouTube, you find out what really is circulating in the Christian world, and it's not always good. But you have some people whose whole aim and goal in life is to talk about how it's not biblical to teach about tithing.
Yeah.
And yet tithing is one of the in my mind, is one of the foundation stones of learning to establish some dominion over your finances and in your overall walk with God.
Yeah, dominion is discipline.
Yeah.
Preach.
Dominion actually is when you now rule. You and the Spirit of God rule in the personality of your life. That's what dominion is. You're not ruled by emotions. You're not ruled by circumstances. You're not manipulated by the demonic. Your past isn't the ruling factor, but now dominion is where the Spirit of God and truth and the Word of God has now, in your personality, you have this discipline, which tithing is, and you know, you've probably heard me say this. When I was a new convert, I had no clue what tithing was.
Right.
My wife and I saw people put money in an envelope. I said, hey, what are they doing? She said, I think they're tithing. I said, what is that? And she said something about 10%. I said, 10%? Whoever went into a club, if you're watching today, and said, 10%, and then I'm out of here. I thought it was ridiculous. And so from the very beginning, we always gave as much as we tithed.
Yeah.
Because to me it was, you went to the dealer and said, 10%. Never in your life. You know, I used to spend everything partying and brag. You missed it. What an incredible time. Had nothing. And so when I came into the kingdom, and of course, Pastor Warner, you know, the hippie days, it was almost a crime to have money.
Right.
You know, but when I came into the kingdom, I thought, I'm going to give. Yeah. And I'm going to tithe, but I'm going to give. And the miracles, and you guys have heard, just incredible, beyond imagination, miracles of return, because you'll never outgive God.
Yeah. That illustration of the children of Israel who were delivered but then wandered in the wilderness, never really saw dominion. There isn't an abundance of stories relating to money, but there is a huge amount relating to our words.
Right.
And so as they found themselves now out of Egypt, they've, even at the edge of the Red Sea, they weren't all that great, but you find a huge correlation between dominion and the words that they were speaking, and how that their words were what was defeating them and keeping them from what God had for their lives.
The greatest battle in all of life is words, the tongue, language. That is, it is so powerful. You mentioned James. James said, if you can bridle your tongue, you're perfect, you're complete.
Yeah.
And then he gives this whole discourse on the tongue, which really is talking about words, is that it's like bits in a horse's mouth. It's like it sets the course of your life. You are a product today of the words you spoke in your past. I could predict your future by your present conversation.
Yes.
Hebrews 11:3. By faith, the worlds were framed by the word of God. Well, that's not just true of God, that's true of you. You frame your world by the language you speak. Do you speak biblically? And I'm not talking about every quote, but I'm talking in your language, is there redemption?
Yes.
Is there faith? Is there vision? Is there grace? Is there mercy? Is there kindness? All the fruit of the Spirit. Is there hope? Is there inspiration? All of those things. Is that a part of your language? The children of Israel, it was always murmur and complain. Wall cities, giants, we be like grasshoppers. There is no faith in any of that. Caleb and Joshua, they said, that may be true, but our God is well able to give us that which he promised us. And God said, I'm going to take you in.
This doesn't mean that we go around, like you said, quoting scriptures in every conversation, but in our processing of life, our words, like you said, are going to have such a powerful impact on whether or not we end up living in dominion or living in, complaining or disgruntled. And so I thought, because I know you mentioned it in the beginning of the book, and I've heard you preach on it a number of times, and it's always resonated deeply with me as you've talked a great deal about the issue of fatherlessness,
right?
That we are a fatherless generation. And so the signs, the symptoms of this, how this shapes whether or not people have dominion in life.
Most of the men, not so much presently, because more and more the church is getting older. We're discipling men that have been raised in church, know their fathers, but a huge portion of men and even ladies, couples that we disciple, have had no relationship with their father. Either they don't even know who he is, or he was not in the home. They were raised by mother, grandmother, aunties, or even if he was in the home, he was so occupied with his own life, he had no time for his sons. The problem with that I encountered a number of years ago is if you've been raised by a mother. My mother, she wanted to dialogue with me. She wanted to, son, you know that's not right. That's your sister's. Don't touch that, etc. My father, it was a different, son, that's your sister's. You touch that, there's going to be pain. And so the problem now, you've been raised by a mother or grandmother. You come into the kingdom and you're crying out for a father figure, a role model. But when it comes to correction, you view correction as rejection.
Yes.
You don't love me. You don't understand me. You don't care about me, which is totally unbiblical. Hebrews says, if I can't correct you, you're illegitimate. And so my goal when I began to discover that was to create a culture in the church where to be corrected was like an honor. I'm loved.
Yeah.
I'm loved. I'm accepted. And that accelerated the discipleship. But your identity as a male especially comes from your father. Like I say, my dad had issues, went through World War II, periodic alcoholic. He'd be sober and then he'd just go on a binge. But he was there for me. I got to see what a man, how he conducted himself in life. He spoke into my life. He corrected me. And that computed out into discipline. Son, we don't talk like that. No, you're not going to say that. No, you listen. And all of that was a plus when I got saved. And so a fatherless generation, they're longing. I'm amazed. I'm almost 80 years old. And young men still want to be with me. I had even some of the men said, Pastor, hey, can we ride with you down to discipleship? They didn't know I was coming down Sunday afternoon. They want to come to my house. They want to sit. They want to talk. And to me, that staggers the mind. But it's speaking of a need, of a desire.
Yeah. And you don't have to wear skinny jeans to get that to happen.
I'd be embarrassed, Harold. I'd be embarrassed.
Yeah. As should everyone, right?
Yeah, that statement, and I've heard you preach it, is the one that I've always carried with me, that a fatherless generation views correction as rejection. That's... we're talking about emotional health. That is a major contributor to that. And there's a book I just read about called The Boy Crisis. And it's another, and the amount of research here is overwhelming, but it's about all the statistics and research is done over uninvolved fathers, but it said emotionally, living at home without a dad has a greater correlation with suicide among teenagers than any other factor. And so it's not talking about having a perfect father, but it's having one that you mentioned was present. That the implications of it are staggering.
Yeah, it's God's design.
Yeah,
that's the thing. When you violate God's pattern for humanity, which is the family, He began with a family. Then there's always consequences. And it's not just, you're watching, listening today, it's not just it's girls.
Yeah.
They desperately need a father's love. He loves me unconditionally. I don't have to perform to gain, I don't have to give away my virginity or my purity to gain some kind of attention or affection. That's critical in young ladies. And again, what happens with men if they do not have a father in their home? A lot of the men that I pastor, they attach themselves to a gang because that became their identity, or their hat, L.A., New York Yankees. You see all of these. We've had funerals where hundreds of them in our church, and their colors. All of this is, I don't have identity. Their identity becomes their clothes. Think of this. People wear the clothes with someone else's name on it.
Right.
I mean, really, just think about that. It'd be like me wearing a shirt, Pastor Warner. That'd be an honor. But I'm just saying but that's a cry. I'm lost. I don't know who I am. And so they attach to a gang, and in that attachment, it causes them major problems. And we see that on social media, all of these war games these kids are in. They're crying out for identity. This is the great thing about the gospel, is God can give you an identity.
I think a lot of studies show the amount of time a father spends with a child is one of the strongest predictors of that child's ability to empathize when they get older, or their connection with, the rest of humanity is indicative of how much time they spend with their dad. Whether a girl, like you said, where she's not looking to be fulfilled or to be affirmed by everyone else, but because her father invested in her, she can therefore be a nurturer and be a giver, or a young man who's not angry at the world with a chip on his shoulder, thinking everybody's looking down on him. But he's been affirmed by his father, knowing, hey, I'm a man. I have, like you said, I have my own identity. This is how we do things. It's night and day. It's a powerful predictor.
Yeah, one of the, this last summer, with all of the unrest and according to one news, mostly peaceful demonstrations, etc. But of all the commentary, and there was, nonstop commentary, talking heads, making giving their 2 cents about it. One thing in an article that I saw stood out to me, because no one else was saying this. No one else had made the connection, but it was by Mae Eberstadt. And the title said, "To understand unrest in America, you need to understand the crisis of fatherlessness." The whole realm of, you said it perfectly, this is God's design. And when we depart from God's design, we can tell ourselves, that we're smart and we are evolved. We are a postmodern generation, but we're always going to pay a price, because you can't violate God's design and prosper in life, have the dominion that you're talking about. And so I'm glad that, you captured in that book that simple yet profound truth that the purpose of deliverance needs to lead to establishing dominion in every area of our life, because any man, woman of any age that grasps that and puts that into practice in their life is going to be blessed. It is a blessing, Joe, to think that after all these years, we still have a platform. Number one, we still have something to say, because the Bible, God's word, is inexhaustible.
Right.
But we still have a platform and have not become, you're more relevant than anyone that I know, and we haven't become obsolete, and there's still a world to be won, and there's still souls to be reached.
Yeah, the human heart never changes in the identity of need.
Yeah.
And what a privilege, Harold, what a privilege. I mean, all of these years, the privilege of people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, people come up and I'm in a foreign country somewhere, and they say, "Would you pray for my son?" I said, "I'd love to." "How old is he?" "Well, he's 10 years old. He was born when you were here 10 years ago. We named him Joe Campbell or Joe or something, Joseph." And I mean, to think of that, the influence of the gospel.
Yes.
The privilege. People come to me and ask me about sermons that I preach. I can't even remember the sermon. The joy. And I say that to everyone watching that wants to be a pastor or preacher, pastor's wife. The joy of serving people. The incredible privilege of seeing people that are broken come through the doors, or you have a part to play in their life, and see them not just delivered, but see their life begin to take on dominion. It's beyond price.
Yeah, beyond words. We are blessed, and so I am like you. I don't have the words to express the gratitude and the depth of blessing that brings to our lives. So,
Amen. We would like to thank Pastor Campbell for his time, for the outstanding content. There's no way for people that are watching this to understand what I'm about to say, but sitting here at this table, Pastor Warner and Pastor Campbell, all I can do is gloat and say, hey, I was here and you weren't, but you can watch it, and outstanding stuff. The book, you can find it on Amazon, of course. It's called Deliverance to Dominion, How to Gain Control of Your Life. And you can also like and subscribe. It's 2021, guys. Like and subscribe, 5 stars. You know the drill. We will be back next week with another Door Church Connect episode, and we encourage you to join us once again. God bless you.